Today I'm in Coulson Park, which is sandwiched in between the Yellowstone River, which is behind me right here, and the I-90. That's why you can hear a lot of traffic in the background, so I do apologize about that in advance. If you lived in Billings, Montana from 1940 to 1957, you probably remember this park when it was used as Billings' official landfill before it was replaced in a new location over in the southwest of the city. Even before then, back in the 1930s, this was used as a dump. But the real reason why I'm here is because of the town side of Coulson. In between 1877 and 1885, there was a completely different atmosphere in this location. There was a little Yellowstone River town with big dreams, and that was Coulson. If you're interested in knowing about this incredible little town, then stick around. This little town that sprung up back in 1877 is no longer here. There's no remnants of it except for basically this plaque right here, which says town site of Coulson, Custer County, Montana Territory in 1877 to 1882. Born by the river and killed by the railroad, giving to Billings her best citizens, to Boot Hill her residue, and the Yellowstone her memories. Yellowstone Historic Society 1982. So, unfortunately, really the only things that are here that really talk about this location is this plaque on this rock right here and Boot Hill. Those are really the only two things. There are little locations every once in a while that will mention Coulson, but other than that, these are really the only two spots that you'll actually, you know, kind of figure out that there's a town here. Hello everybody, Joshua here from That Montana Guy, bringing another video, this time about Coulson. So first of all, I'd like to say thank you all for watching. I know these videos are kind of boring, but thanks for sticking with me on these. So again, it's about the town of Coulson, a town with big dreams. This town was hoped to be the head of navigation on the Yellowstone, as Fort Benton was on the Missouri River. In the winter of 1876-1877, Perry W. McAdow, M-C-A-D-O-W, found a convenient fording spot on the north bank of the Yellowstone, as you see behind me. Yellowstone River is actually right over here. Right back there is actually the site of Coulson. And when he found this location, he placed a store and a sawmill here. So one thing you kind of have to realize is back here in 1876, 1877, we didn't have vehicles, obviously. The only real transportation out here was by horse, wagon, or by the steamboat. In fact, the honorable name Coulson came from the Coulson Packet Steamboat Company, which owned a number of steamships, including the Josephine, which actually made it past here over by Riverfront Park, and that's as far as it got through the Yellowstone before it had to turn back around because it was unsafe to go any further. The Coulson Packet Steamship Company operated riverboats or riverboat lines between St. Louis and Montana, and this is as far as it got on the Yellowstone. Today, as you can see behind me, the I-90 bridge to Lockwood separates the site actually. It was kind of cut in half. Part of it is on this side, on the western side of the interstate, the other half is on the eastern side. In fact, a short distance from the interstate, people unknowingly drive over the original marker for the Coulson survey of 1881. Alright, so the town consisted of cattle buyers, saddle tramps, prospectors, bison hunters, railroad surveyors, soldiers, and the army of civilians, which consisted of farmers, freighter guides, and scouts who were serving the military in this area at the close of the Indian Wars. It also consisted of gamblers, prostitutes. In fact, there's a story of an individual that there's actually kind of a sad story attached to it. I'll go ahead and talk about that when I talked about Boot Hill. But mountain men, trappers, and Midwest business people. After Perry McAdow's built a store. Many other businesses sprung up around, and Coulson flourished as a ferry crossing, stagecoach stop, and a trading center for the area. Alright, so the town of Coulson was laid out by 3 men. It was Perry W. Mikado. As I mentioned before, he was the founder and became leader of Coulson, possibly due to being involved in most of its many early businesses. The second person was Joseph Cochran. He was a rancher that owned property further upstream, which is actually called Riverfront Park now. He owned property over there, and he also worked at times at the Mikado's sawmill to make a living. And the third person was John J. Alderson, who was handpicked by Perry to watch over his Yellowstone operations at Coulson. He also owned much of the land in what became Coulson, as well as being the owner of a hotel in Coulson. Alright, so the town of Coulson, the buildings that consisted of that town were Mikado's store, his sawmill. There was also a ferry crossing, general stores, drugstore, a dance hall, post office, brewery, newspaper, eventually a telegraph, the inevitable saloons, which in fact, I gotta check my notes here because it's too good to be true. According to the fascinating book Billings from A to Z by Karen Stevens, which if you don't know about her, she's a very well-educated historian of Montana. She has many books. I would recommend checking her books out. But anyways, in her book it describes that these saloons at Coulson nearly all had high doors so cowboys could ride their horses up to the bar. So as you can see, it's kind of like the Wild Wild West. I can't imagine nowadays, you know, you walking you're riding your horse into a saloon saying, hey, give me a beer please. But anyways, so also along with the saloons, it had board sidewalks, street lights, laundromat. In fact, there's a story of the laundromat that I'll talk about later. Just remember about the laundromat. Drugstore, and after Billings was created further down over behind me over here, it also had a horse-drawn trolley, which with the price of a ticket to go from Billings to Coulson, you were offered a free beer at Coulson. A majority, when Billings was first getting started, it actually didn't have a post office. The only way to get their mail and everything was actually to go to Coulson. But that didn't last very long. But when it did, people would get a free beer when they were going to get their mail anyways. It also consisted of a hotel, or two-story hotel, who was owned by Alderson, which if you remember correctly, he's one of the 3 fellows that basically created this town, Coulson. In fact, when Christensen Yagan arrived in 1881, he stayed at the grandly named International Hotel, which was that one by Alderson, which in reality is more like a log cabin. It wasn't anything fancy like nowadays. In fact, according to Karen Stevens in her book Billings A to Z, for $1 a night, customers could step or sleep on a buffalo hide that covered the floor of the dining room. So, you know, you paid quite a bit of money just to sit on a fur rug on the floor. But there were 2 things that Coulson did lack. One of them was a church. So when individuals passed away, they would actually go north over to what's called Boot Hill Cemetery. They go north up there, and because there wasn't a pastor or priest or anything like that, the majority of the people would just kind of say a simple prayer or you know, just some words about the dearly departed, and then they would hurry up and race back into Coulson to go to one of these saloons to take a drink for that individual that passed away. So it lacked a church. The second thing it lacked was a jail. In fact, John Liver-Eating Johnson, who moved to Coulson to work as a deputy sheriff, once explained his own law enforcement techniques to Sheriff Thomas Irvin, and I quote, "There isn't any jail here, so when I find someone who isn't behaving and should be arrested, I just gives them a good whooping, and that's an end of it. I've never arrested the same man twice." This piece right here was actually taken from the book Pieces and Places of Billings History by Joyce Jensen, which is also another fantastic book about Billings history. I would recommend both books by Karen Stephen and this Mrs. Jensen. And then while this was all happening, well, they had all these places being built up. The residents themselves, they actually usually lived in quickly built shacks or tents lining the roadways that were in Coulson. So as you can see, it was kind of a quick residence, or quick town, kind of a quick boom. I'm going to use my notes for the rest of this because it's getting kind of hard to remember a lot of the facts about this town. So I do apologize if I'm cheating. That's just kind of how the way it is. I'd rather give you guys the correct information than guess, so I do apologize. When I was talking about how all these stores and everything were being built up, they were all being used by lumber. So as you can see, lumber for those buildings was in high demand. Businessmen actually floated down the river, makeshift rafts of logs, to Coulson be milled into planks for this town. I did mention about Liver-Eating Johnson. He was the one that I talked about that was telling Sheriff Irvin that what he would do to make it so people would behave. In fact, his predecessor of that famous man, there was also another famous deputy sheriff, and unfortunately he was one of the ones that did get murdered in Coulson. His name was H.M. Muggins Taylor. Unfortunately he was shot and killed at Coulson Laundromat, the one that I mentioned earlier that was one of the places located in this town. He's actually, after he was murdered, he was taken up to Boot Hill, and he was buried up there, and his tombstone is still up there to this day. Before Billings was created, the only cemetery was actually for Coulson was Boot Hill. In fact, there's rumored to be a couple of residents from Billings that were buried up there too. Another interesting fact about this town was that I mentioned that it began in 1877 to 1885. During the 1877 flight of the Nez Perce, I don't know if you are too aware of that, but it's, long story short, the Nez Perce came from, I think it was either Idaho or Oregon or Washington area, and they came through Idaho, Montana to hopefully go up to Canada, but they were stopped just south of the Canadian border. I'll actually do some videos about that later on, but if you're not familiar with it, check it out. It's actually an interesting and really sad situation that happened. But anyways, so the 1877 flight of the Nez Perce, a couple of raiding parties followed the Yellowstone River, and the reason why that's kind of a big deal is because in 1877 they crossed over what's known as Laurel, Montana, just west of Billings. They crossed over the Yellowstone in that area to go up north, and a couple of the raiding parties, instead of following them, started following the Yellowstone down here. So they had they attacked Coulson Ranch, which is over in Riverfront Park, and I'll talk about that in a different segment, but they attacked over there, and then they also came down here to Coulson. The Nez Perce warriors killed 2 men, Clinton Dills and Milton Summer, on the it was actually on Joseph Cochran's ranch, like I just said, over at Riverfront Park, where that's located. They killed 2 gentlemen over there, and their name was Clinton Dills and Milton Summer. They also burned his first home and a tent on their way to Coulson. On their travel to Coulson and back to the main party of the Nez Perce tribe, which was again crossing the Yellowstone over by what's present-day Laurel. They burned some buildings, including the Coulson Saloon. They burned a few haystacks, stole a few horses, which some were from the Cochran's ranch, and even stole a stagecoach. Say what you will, I think that's kind of interesting that they stole a stagecoach. I'm pretty sure they were having a fun time riding that. But again, that's all the information I have for this segment. The next segment is going to be talking about the demise of Coulson, and why it disappeared, and it was so brief of a history, and what many theorize of what actually killed the town. So again, thank you all for watching, and I'll stay safe out there and enjoy the woods.
Glow in the sunrise, all around, nothing but blue sky, and there's nothing like being here again.